too many of us to do introductions because it's a largest group, but I would encourage you to put your name and organisation you're from in your Zoom name, but also introduce yourself in the chat, including what lands you're currently on. So in this afternoon's session, you'll hear from 3 community organisations, Choice, Uniting Communities South Australia and St Vincent de Paul's Victoria, who have begun decarbonising their operations, and they will talk you through the journey that they've been on to date. So in today's format, it'll be a panel discussion followed by audience Q&A. We'll make the Q&A interactive, so we'll ask you to come off mute to ask your question. But to help the process, please put your question in the chat or raise your virtual hand. And today, so you don't have to spend the whole time hearing my voice like you have for the last 3 workshops, it's my pleasure to introduce the chair for today's session, ACOSS Sachdeva from HESTA. HESTA have been one of the sponsors for the Better Futures Forum, and it's really great to have ACOSS here today as well. HESTA have also decarbonised their operations, so I think it's really great that we've got someone with that experience chairing us today. So ACOSS has over 10 years experience in the delivery of responsible investment. He joined HESTA in February 2018 as Senior Responsible Investment Advisor to support the implementation of HESTA's leading responsible investment strategy, including climate change strategy and active ownership programs. Prior to HESTA, ACOSS was an environmental, social and governance analyst for Reganon, a global leader in long-term value, systematic risk analysis and responsible investment advisory. ACOSS has also worked with Monash Sustainability Institute. He holds a Masters of Corporate Sustainability from Monash University and a Bachelor's of Commerce and Arts from La Trobe University. Welcome, ACOSS, and thank you for chairing today. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Kelly. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm dialing in, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Yeah, like Kelly said, HESTA's been on a similar journey to carbon neutral, which we achieved a couple of years ago in our offices. My current scheme of work is implementing the same commitment that we've made across our entire investment portfolio to net zero by 2050, but of course focusing on getting real world reductions first before we go and offset the remainder to make sure that we're not trying to get away with just offsets. So I'll so that we've got lots of time for questions and discussion, I'll go straight into introducing our panel today. So today we've got Matthew Steen from Choice. Matthew has worked at Choice for over 10 years from customer service and testing, content production, and now Director of Reviews and Testing, which conducts all the testing content for Choice. Before Choice, he worked in IT support for about 12 years across a range of industries. Matthew joined Choice because of 2 elements. It's a non-profit business that doesn't accept advertising, and it's also mission-driven. Matthew's educational background is in ethics, and he currently sits as a council member on the Standards Australia Council representing Choice. He's also one of the people that add up the energy and carbon credits to make sure Choice stays carbon neutral. We'll also be joined by Suzanne Ridding, representing Uniting Communities South Australia. Suzanne is the proprietor of Sustainable Business Consultants and has been practicing sustainability for nearly 15 years. In 2010, Suzanne took on the role of guiding Uniting Communities on its journey to achieving carbon neutrality and is still a part of their ongoing commitment. Suzanne specialises in sustainability strategy, carbon accounting, emissions reduction, climate risk, and responsible investment. She is a founding partner of Carbon Neutral Adelaide and a registered consultant with Climate Active, assisting organisations, events, precincts, and buildings to become carbon neutral. Suzanne has worked with many large and small businesses, governments, councils, and large not-for-profits. She's a graduate in sustainable business, a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, holds an MBA, and is a fellow of the Leaders Institute of South Australia. Our third panelist is Gavin Dufty, who's currently employed as Executive General Manager of Policy and Research at St Vincent de Paul Society Australia. Gavin has been active in the community welfare sector for over 30 years. He's undertaken research on electricity disconnections, documented changes in energy pricing and its impact on households, and been involved in the development of the energy consumer protection and concession frameworks. In addition, Gavin has also undertaken research into the provision of emergency relief and changes in cost pressures and the impact on households. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to kick it off with the first question, which is, what was the motivation of your organisation for wanting to decarbonise? We'll start with Matthew.
Sure. So our primary mission was, context is we get all of our funding from membership fees that people usually come in to view washing machine reviews, etc., that we test in labs. We recognized that we were using a lot of energy to do all that testing and using a lot of membership fees, and a way that we could reduce our reliance on energy was to become carbon neutral. So that's how that was our prime motivator, was that we could then redirect membership fees into more important things, which was purpose-driven work like campaigns and testing.
Great, thanks. And Suzanne?
Yes, thanks very much. Great to be here, and thanks for that introduction. I'm sitting here on the lands of the Kaurna people today at Uniting Communities. The reason that Uniting Communities decided to become a carbon neutral organisation, it started out in 2010 with the board making that decision that it would do so by 2015. And the reason is that it was really a moral decision. I mean, this is a very large, not-for-profit organisation that's really helping the most vulnerable people in the community. And it was aware that climate change really presents risks and challenges for everybody, but that, the people that are Uniting Communities clients are most at risk and least unable to help themselves. So, they're going to be more exposed to the extreme weather and intense heat and what have you than perhaps the rest of the population, and also less able to afford increasing energy bills. So that was the reason for kicking off.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. And Gavin?
Thanks, Akash. Oh, I'm off mute. I thought I was on mute. There you go. That's good. Thanks, and I'm calling from Wurundjeri, Warrong and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation down here in Victoria. We had a little bit of a different type of journey. I've been working in the energy space at Vinnie's Vic for about 20 years, and during that time, we'd gone through all our sites and we'd put the LED light through and did a lot of energy efficiency improvements. And being an organisation that's part of the circular economy, we've got op shops, so people donate to us, and it was sort of in our DNA. We'd sort of done as much as we could, and then we got presented an opportunity through some of our corporate partners came to us where they were going on this journey. Telstra, Ben Burge, who heads up Belong, which is part of the Telstra mob, they were doing it as an organisation for their head office, and they said, do you want to come along for the ride? And we said, yep, we'll give it a go. So we jumped in with them, and then another corporate partner that we've been working with, Deloitte, who had a lot of the, I suppose, the technical grunt behind it all, doubled down with that. And we sort of got Climate Active accredited as a service. So from the time you drop off to one of our bins, so all our supply chains logistics are picked up. If you're in a homework club or a soup van, all those sorts of things have been covered. So we wouldn't have been able to do it without those corporate partners to get us across the line.
Thanks, Gavin. So I think we can see the range of motivations from members to partners to really part of the mission and purpose of your organisations, all driving you to make this change. And really interesting. I wonder for all of you whether there's been a lot of feedback. So say, Matthew, from choice members, has there been has there been demand from their side, or to Suzanne or Gavin as well in the communities that you work with and for? Have you felt that there's a strong demand from?
Yeah, I could. So we didn't have any demand from our membership, but there was. That's because we didn't actually go out and ask them. We just thought that there would be an expectation. So we thought, well, we know our members, they would just expect us to do this, so we should get it done. And that started in 2014. But I think you've got another question, which I won't go into yet until you actually ask, what did you do to get it?
Yeah, sure. Anyone else on that? Sorry, I know there's the set questions, but I couldn't help the opportunity to ask.
Yeah, it's the same here. This organisation really felt it was their responsibility. I mean, you know, these sort of clients are not really going out and saying, you know, we want you to do something about climate change, but it is an expectation of the remit, I think, of Uniting Communities, that it's its responsibility to look after, you know, the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people. So couldn't get a much better reason than that.
We, and again, it might pop up in the other question, we had a bit of a different challenge in there. We really shaped ours around about the circular economy, and that's where it's in our DNA, linked it a lot back to about how the financial savings we could make and the positioning of the organisation to be more of an attractive place to volunteer and donate to, and didn't lift up the emissions reductions, the climate stuff, because we were having conversations internally where some of the, being a volunteer in a member-based organisation, some of the members and volunteers saw that as different than the mission, the social justice, social equity mission. And so they got challenged. They thought that, you know, a paid staff were capturing their organisation. So we had to craft it a little bit different to bring everybody along and marry it all up, but keep the external comms in our core mission front and centre. So that did create some internal challenges and quite, I suppose, robust conversations for some.
Yeah, great. That's a good segue into the next question, which is about the process of how did you and your organisations go about achieving this? And interesting, it's not just a technical challenge, but as Gavin flagged, it's a sort of human challenge as well to win different people on board. Matthew, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I should just expect to go first in each of these now that I've been introduced first. Sorry, everyone. So how did we go about it? We started off in 2014, and I've got to say I haven't been through the entire process. I started doing this process from about 2015, but in 2014 we had an energy audit that identified several areas about how to actually lower our energy use. And there wasn't much friction in the staff, like the staffing. There was just we should do that. That sounds sensible. In 2015, we devised the framework, the plan that we'd actually follow, which was basically hitting all the heavy hitters. So things like in 2016, we replaced most of the CFLs and halogens. In 2017, we had a solar array put on. Replaced all the air conditioners because they were at end of life already. In 2018, we started the process of actually bringing staff into the actual engagement, which was where we started to get rid of, it sounds small, but it's actually large, getting rid of waste bins. So you're doing, instead of everyone having their own personal waste bin, you make them so that people have to get up and think about which waste bin they're putting it into so that you can actually reduce and then redirect that waste. And then in 2019, there was more staff engagement around the worm farms and composting programs. And then in 2020, there was just a natural reduction in the commuting and energy for the building due to COVID. But from 2016, 2017, we've been a part of the Climate Active program, which we found really good because it's a methodology we can follow, and we're used to following methodologies or standards. So it gave us a really good framework to follow.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, over to me. I could write a book on this, so you might have to to stop me because there's so much that I could say, and I'm happy to take questions or whatever. But Uniting Communities began their exercise by developing a steering committee. So there was one of the execs and a couple of senior managers on that. And then they thought, oh, we need some help. So that's when I was got on board at the same time and became part of that steering committee. They also created a committee of staff from all across the organisation. So they, put out an email, asking for nominations and people that were interested. And I think we got 11 people initially from all areas of the organisation, from services, from the corporate side of things, from the legal side of things, and so on and so forth, from marketing. And that group, they sort of got together and they gave the program a name. And at the time it was called Towards Carbon Neutral. They also developed a policy. So, really thought hard about what the vision was going to be and, how they were going to go about it. Then they began the task of measuring the carbon footprint. So, as that old saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. And that was, that was a really hard thing to do. And I'll talk a bit more about that under the challenges. But once that carbon footprint was obviously pulled together, then you're in a position to be able to work out, well, where are we going to start attacking this first? And there were a number of different programs. We kind of looked at it from 3 areas. So there's the policy side of it, what can you make a big decision about and change things there? So for Uniting Communities, they had a fleet of 120 vehicles. And the policy was that every new vehicle would have to be a hybrid vehicle. So now they're up to, I think there's only 1 car left that isn't, and that's because it's not there isn't a hybrid that's fit for purpose. They also got some energy reviews done of particularly the large owned sites, and like Matthew said, started changing the old unenergy efficient light globes to LEDs, putting in solar panels, that kind of thing. We also used procurement a bit. So at the time, back in 2010, there were about 20 different waste contractors, costing an awful lot of money. So they used procurement and went out to tender and just got 1 waste contractor for like all the main sites. And not only did that save an awful lot of money, but it meant that, you got the right bins in place and, were really able to educate people as to, what bins to put things in. Also, talking about education, the executive team sort of made it, or that steering committee, they made it mandatory for staff to be educated. So, we delivered session after session for staff who came in groups to learn about climate change and why the organisation was doing this and what it meant for them and how they could be involved. And we've also subsequently built an online learning program about it as well, which is part of the induction for the organisation. So I guess, as I said, there's sort of several parts to it: policy, procurement, and then behaviour change is the big one. So with behaviour change, we've introduced various, we call them campaigns along the way, and it's things like switching off lights, switch off campaign, and we've had the Why Waste campaign and the Drive Green, and everything sort of had a name to it and had a bit of a promotional or a challenge or a prize to win for the site that does the best. And just finally, I won't go on forever on this, although I could. After a couple of years of the program being in place, we decided that really needed to have somebody at every site sort of being a bit of a champion, because the Uniting Communities has about 60 or 70 sites or more here in South Australia. So we introduced the concept of a Towards Carbon Neutral site representative, a bit like an OH&S rep, and that person, has helped to sort of deliver the program at their particular site. So there's a lot there, and it keeps going.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, ours was very, very different. As is the Vinnie's way, everything's a lot more chaotic and random. I suppose the essence was when the opportunity presented itself, the CEO and the senior executive then delegated it to myself and Jason, the other person, and we were just told to run with it. And we just ran with it internally. Again, there was a lot of, just the moons aligned. It just worked. The timing was right. and we were very fortunate about that. So internal, there was a lot of support for it from people. So we didn't have any blockers because we had to go across multiple silos inside the organisation to cover it all, because we've got to count everything. The corporate partners that came in, the pro bono work that Deloitte did the audits, and Pangolin who did the other audit, the skilled people there actually in their uni days had volunteered in Vinnie's. So they'd come back 20 years later and they knew some of the people in there. So we had these externals came in that were welcomed because they'd been there as volunteers in the past, which just made it a lot smoother. So when they were asking, and the auditing can get quite intrusive, and we were doing it before the end of last financial year. So where they were jumping around in finance and other places right at the time when they were flat chat, head down, bum up. So and they didn't create blockages. So that all worked well. And I think that the key thing, and I think it was consistent with the other two speakers as well, is culturally they were ready and they wanted it to do it. But without that cultural buy-in, it wouldn't have happened. There would have been just blockers and, doors would have been shut all over the place. But that culturally just being ready for it, it was so smooth. And it was done within a couple of months. It was amazingly quick once you got the buy-in. But if that buy-in wasn't there, I don't think we would have been able to do it.
Great, thanks. But the next question then is, what are the benefits that you saw from undertaking this process?
Yeah, I'll kick off. So employee engagement through the entire process has been really good, which has been great because, as Gavin was alluding to there, when you've got buy-in, it just becomes so much smoother. The fact that we've reduced energy usage by 53% in between 2014 and 2019, or 244 tons of carbon. That means we've got more money to funnel into other net zero programs or towards zero emissions programs. We've been climate active for 5 years. I mentioned that occasionally. I think Gavin was also saying that they're climate active. The reason I keep on mentioning climate active is because there's a part of climate active, almost like a marketing initiative, where the networking available, where you start to identify other climate active partners, because it takes the pressure off you to carbon offset it once you partner with climate active people or organizations. There's a networking potential there, which is kind of like compound interest. It's really quite useful. And throughout the process, we've had some awards from our local LGA around smart energy use, which is nice. But also that's really good because it gives kind of like a local vindication to the efforts that you've put in. Suzanne?
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Well, I'd reiterate all of that, so I won't repeat it. I think, yeah, there's certainly very much staff buy-in. The attraction and retention rate has been quite interesting, and we actually did a survey last year of employees. So this is after 10 years of the program running, and the results of the survey, showed us that over 75% of staff that were new to the organisation since the organisation became carbon neutral, they said they'd actually joined or stayed because of their effort that Uniting Communities was making to do something about climate change. And it showed an enormous amount of pride in that as well. So I think that's something that really matters these days, with young people, looking for jobs. They're interviewing the companies they want to go and work for because they're really interested in what the planet's going to look like in however many years' time, and they want to be a part of that and work for an organisation with a social conscience. The other thing for us is it's quite hard to measure the cost savings, but we had a go at it, and we're saving probably about $400,000 a year at least. So that's well over $1.5 million since the program began. So that's a huge saving, and like Matthew said, that can go back into the social programs that this organisation is aiming to deliver. The other thing has been the ability to respond to tender questions. So when you're trying to get money to run your programs, most of them these days will ask, what are you doing to reduce your environmental impact, or have you measured your carbon footprint? And so, Uniting Communities can then answer that question and hopefully sort of get more points. What else can I add? Yeah, the reputation side of it. So Uniting Communities was the inaugural ambassador for Carbon Neutral Adelaide. So that was fantastic. And, we've won a few awards as well, including from the Premier's Climate Change Council and Carbon Neutral Adelaide as well. So there's been a lot of benefits. And I think it goes right down to the supply chain as well, with your partnerships and, building that network of like-minded groups.
Yeah, it's a very similar story to us. We've got a sense of pride in the organisation from the people that are there, a preferred place to be for employment or to volunteer, and to donate goods, times and resources. And we see some opportunity, well, not opportunities, it positions us in that corporate world as a leader. And we think that's really important. I mean, if Vinnies can do it, anybody can. And so there's no excuse now, and we're encouraging the other parts of the Vinnies across Australia to do it. We've also, because of that, it's sort of opened up the floodgates as well. We're in the process of installing 1.8 megawatts of solar across all our assets. That'll save us about $1 million over 10 years. On top of that, we've got EV charging and stationary batteries built into that. So we're trying to leverage that into virtual power plants, and we're planning to move our fleet to hybrid electric to full electric, so we can further extract value from that. It also opened up the floodgate. So now we're actually got into battery recycling, little batteries that you put in appliances and devices. That's been good. And also we've moved into container recycling with the big government. So it's basically allowed to build out that circular economy and have other environmental impacts, but also financial benefits for us. And I think the other big thing, one of the selling points internally is it's an insurance product for us. It not only generates revenue, a place to volunteer, a place to work, but it insures the organisation about any future cost impacts or emissions trading scheme or anything like that comes along. We've got an insurance product as well from the impacts of those sorts of things. So it's the gift that sort of keeps giving.
Great, thanks. Yeah, really interesting to hear so many benefits and also so many benefits which are not just the energy and the emission saving, but the benefits in terms of workforce engagement and reputation, and then also sort of broader opportunities that something like this has brought about, which is really exciting. The next question to have a think about is the flip side, is what have been the challenges from this process?
I think from a choice perspective, anytime you lose someone involved in a carbon accounting process, it slows it down. It's really important to engage your financial department early because they know this process. They use a parallel process. And carbon accounting in general, for me, I don't have an accounting degree. It's a steep learning curve. So it's useful to have some people who know what they're doing. The messaging for staff needs to be really consistent and constant. I think Suzanne mentioned that earlier. You can kind of offset that by having your change makers, which is really important. But it does. So when you've got really consistent messaging, this is what we're working towards. So it gets built into a strategy which covers the entire company. Then it becomes really constant, and people know what to expect. That's become really important, and that means that you need to keep on talking about that over and over because you have people who leave and come in. So there's a lot of consistent messaging. The final thing I'd mention is that the auditing process and the Climate Active certification, to start that off for us, it was quite expensive. just because we undertook it out ourselves, and it can be expensive for a non-profit organisation, which isn't that big. But once you have the people who can do it, it gets easier. Suzanne?
Yeah, again, I think we've all got some similar stories in a way. I was going to say data collection. That was the biggest challenge to start with, because there was nobody specifically dedicated to it, and I think I did it almost single-handedly for years on end until we finally got a system here, and the chief financial officer took it over. So that was great. You know, in terms of collecting the data on a monthly basis and being able to report. And, you know, reporting, I think, is a challenge as well, because it's one way to keep people engaged. Certainly the managers, you know, we're always saying, you know, what else can you do at your site? And they want to see the results. And so I think that's really important, to get a good set of reports going out to people that are actually meaningful. You know, you can tell them as much as you like about how many carbon emissions they've saved, but they really want to know, how much money have I saved and how am I doing and will I get a reward for it? So I'd say, like, momentum is also another thing. You know, we've been doing this for 10 years now, and it gets hard to find the low-hanging fruit. And that's where I think keeping people engaged across the organisation is where, you know, you can continually be getting new ideas coming forward. You know, it's all right having a consultant who could sort of lay it all out, but you know, and I guess I do some of that, but you really need to have people, the whole organization has got to be involved, because that's where you get all the other benefits from. The other one I'd say is finding offsets. Finding offsets, particularly local ones, has been difficult, particularly in South Australia, which unfortunately was sort of a bit behind the 8 ball in getting going in the carbon market. And so Uniting Communities created a policy to buy 50% of their offsets locally if they could, or at least from Australia, and 50% from overseas. And from a budgetary perspective, you know, it's been a fair investment. And the prices are going up exponentially. So that's a big challenge as well. But if the program's saving, you know, say $400,000 a year, and you're spending $30,000 off offsets, then it's really not too bad. So again, I could go on, but they're the main things.
Thanks.
Yeah, we probably did it a little back to front. Once we went on the climate active journey, the commitment, we leveraged the PDS or whatever it is. So we wired into that we would do our solar and all the other things I spoke about. And when I put the business case up internally, I carved off a 2-day-a-week EFT to create a special position inside the organisation that would then build it out from the inside out. So we got the money, and then I stole some of the money to build out internally. And then that person's job is to actually be a business development person, which is then doing the transport stuff I was talking about, the VPP stuff. So we've got this team that's trying to build itself out, which has got coverage, which is great. The technical nature is a challenge for us. We don't have the in-house resources to do that. And as I said, that's how we're trying to build that capacity up, because we can't keep getting pro bono. And I don't want to use the money that we've allocated for a human resource to just get contractors in each time. That means that the culture of the organisation won't change. It'll be year on year rather than just part of what we do. It's, as I said before, it's created some internal challenges. Being a broad church, for want of a better word, we've got people in other states that are members of the Vinnies, and internally we did have a number of people that don't believe in climate change, and were quite vocal about that. Some resigned from the organisation, didn't want to be part of it anymore. Others thought that we were hijacking the organisation. And the story, the things that you prosecute, the conversations that you see just in the community, actually, we're a microcosm of that. So we had all of that, and we've had to craft the conversation along the way, so we didn't end up arguing amongst ourselves, which then would have distracted from the whole place, where we all wanted to be. On the offsets was also interesting. We wanted social justice offsets, so we very much focused on local. We have some Australian-based ones with First Nation communities, and some overseas ones. The overseas ones were about employment programs for renewable energy projects where the community owned and operated the projects. And the ones in Australia were savanna burning up in the Northern Territory. But we spent a lot of time with Ben Burge at Belong, making sure that we got the right offsets, because not all offsets are the same. You know, there's some offsets have a lot of hair around them.
All right, thanks. And now we're going to move to questions soon, but probably one thing that lots of people in the audience will be wondering is, what advice would you give other organisations, community organisations, thinking about taking on this journey?
From a choice perspective, our first step was to get an energy audit. That gave us the insight to see where to start from, because we didn't have the internal expertise. So there was actually, at the time, I don't know if it still is, but at the time there were free energy audits. So we got someone to come in and actually tell us, well, what do we do first? And that gave us, once you've got that, it kind of gives you the impetus to start. And from that, we got to plan out our framework. And we spent a long time doing the framework. We spent a year basically putting it together, because there wasn't a dedicated person to this. We don't have the resources to do that, as most nonprofits don't have the resources, and plan to actually bring everyone on board with it. It's also worth saying that plan for this long term. This isn't going to happen. Like, our experience wasn't the same as Big Gavin's, where you basically did it straight away. We thought that it would be fast for us, and it hasn't been. It's taken 10 years to get where it is, where we are now. So it's been long, but we have high retention here anyway. So most of the people who've been involved with it have been with us from the start. The plan wasn't planned for 10 years. It's just ended up that way. Suzanne?
There's a few things here. One of the main ones is, I would say, treat it with the seriousness that you would, any other strategic initiative. So United Communities has made this a core commitment alongside some of its other core commitments. And every year it's allocated a budget to it. So it's had a capital budget and it's had an operating budget. So I think that's really important, to allocate the money and allocate some people to it, because I see this happen in so many organisations, that the person that's passionate about it sort of gets the job, and they're expected to do it on the back of their other job, and they get no support. Sometimes the execs are not on board and the board's not on board. So I say, start from the top, get the money for it. If that's possible. And I'd say, as well, accept that there is a cost up front, unless you can get everything for free, which the two of you have done a good job of that. But there is a cost up front usually, but it pays dividends over time. You were saying, Gavin, I think with the solar panels, it is a big cost up front, but it's just going to keep paying dividends. So I definitely say that. I'd say, at the risk of pushing my own barrow, I'd say get some good advice. Some consultants do charge through the roof, but try to find one that's willing to sort of work alongside you if you do use a consultant. They can have their uses, particularly in guiding you in the right direction. And I think that's important. The other thing I would say is keep at it. There's always a way, and the more people you tell and the more staff that you involve, they've all got really good ideas. And that's how we're keeping it going here now.
Yeah, yes, very similar conversation for us. Start the conversation internally. I'd be incredibly mindful about making sure you link the conversation to the vision and the mission of the organisation, how this is just part of core business, and we've been remiss not doing it. So we need to start doing it. So it's not seen as a tack on or somebody else's problem or issue to deal with. It's a whole organisational thing that we all need to get into. Executive buy-in and coverage is really important. So when the people say, "I'll push back," or don't quite get it, or don't want to get it because they've got other things to do, with the executive buy-in and coverage, it's sort of like, well, you know, it doesn't roll like that here. You have to do. And the other one is, I'd say, be patient and flexible. You know, things I've been talking about it for ages, but all of a sudden it happened. So there's lots of patience there, and when it happened, it moves so quickly. Once it moves, it really moved for us quite quickly. So the adaptability around it all to speed up and slow down, so you can take the opportunities when they arise, I think is really critical too.
Thanks, everyone. And one last question from me before we open it up to the audience is, you know, we flagged that there's some bits of this that are relatively straightforward, some bits that are quite complicated, some, you know, key big things that we should tick off as we start. But what did you all find were some of the easy things to do that you could do to actually reduce emissions?
From a choice perspective, one of the easiest things you could do is just switch to green energy through your supplier. That's a really easy way to get rid of the electricity emissions. In terms of, you know, becoming carbon neutral, it just minimizes a lot of stuff. Get an energy audit. It helps identify the easy wins if you've got no internal expertise around it. It took us a little while to figure this out, and Suzanne mentioned it earlier, but collect the data, because I had to search who actually gets the electricity bills for the building. And all of that stuff takes time. So you need to make sure you know where all that stuff is. And to do that, you bring the finance department on board. They're like so vital. Identify your change champions. It's a weird term to use. It sounds very corporate, but they're just people who are, they get the mission, and they want to be involved, and they're going to make the change. There's a final one I'd finish with, which is there are grants and funds available, which need some research, so local, state and federal, so it's worth looking into that.
You're just giving me extra ideas I'm writing down. Yeah, the energy side of it's always a good place to start, because, you know, you don't even need to see the business case for LEDs and solar panels now. It's just, if you got the money, I'll just say do it, because the return's going to be pretty good. Use your internal resources that you've got. So here at Uniting Communities, there's energy advisors, you know, and they help these clients in their homes to reduce their energy bills. Well, they also came in used to helping the organisation to reduce its own energy bills, and they gave talks as well. So we've tried to make this not just about the business, but about helping people to be more energy efficient at home, and that's, you know, staff as well as clients. So those people just were, their manager gave them time to be part of the program and to deliver that. We got a free waste audit as well from what was called Zero Waste SA there. It's now Green Industries, but that really helped because Uniting Communities owns Goodwill, the Goodwill stores, you know, that take secondhand clothing, and they went in and just went right through the warehouse and, you know, had so many ideas about what could be done there. Measuring it, yeah, I wouldn't say that's necessarily an easy thing, but it's a need to do. Having things like, you know, the staff, we asked them and they said, make this social, make it competitive. So we've had things like, you know, green days and waste off days, and, you know, reducing electricity challenges, and, you know, giving them all names. They're things that, yes, you need a resource to develop it, but it's not really costing any money to do it. And then it's sending the message as well and educating people. You know, suggest people look at video clips. You know, we put video clips up occasionally, and it just teaches staff about waste management. And you can get your local council in too. That's another thing we've done at some sites. Local councils will often wheel out their waste people and they'll give a talk, you know, and sometimes they'll give you some free bins. Waste is the biggest talking point I find in this whole program. People love to talk about waste. To start with what people are interested in.
We, I suppose the first thing we did is we got all our sites with one retailer. So this is going back about 8 years ago. And from that, there's obligations in Victoria on the retailers to actually provide energy efficiency advice, appliance switch outs and all that sort of stuff as part of what was the VEET program, the Victorian Energy Efficiency Target. And in doing that, the retailer obligation came in. So, you know, we went to LED lights if rooms weren't occupied. So you go into the breakout rooms in my office when we can get in there. And if you don't move around after 10 minutes, all the lights go off, everything shuts down at 6 p.m. in the evening and then fires up again at 7. You have to have special swipe cards. So we'd sort of got all the low-lying fruit through that, but we sort of leveraged the government programs that were there. We don't take any government money. So for us, internally, the imperative is always about reducing our operational costs. So we've got more money to hand out through emergency relief and provide support. So I suppose we're just scroungers. So we sort of optimized our scrounging to do what we do. And then because of those, because we were documenting how much savings we got from those energy efficiency and other interventions, actually highlighted the potential for making those bigger investments like solar. And then once we've got that, then they could see it in our big footprint is logistics. It's liquid fuels. It's not energy, as in electricity and gas. So now they're ready to sort of grasp the nettle on what will be the harder stuff. But that's another couple of years, so we'll be patient on that one.
Great, thank you. Apologies, I've got tradespeople outside in case you can hear some power tools going. But look, some really great tips, I think, for everyone in the audience about you know, technical things to think about in terms of data and audits, but cultural things in terms of, as Suzanne said, starting where people are interested and knowing the culture of your organisation. We're going to move now into an open Q&A. To try and make it interactive, what I'll ask you to do is either, if you want to put your little virtual hand up on Zoom, then you can come off mute and ask your questions to the panel yourselves, or you can drop your question into the Q&A, the chat function, and then I'll call on you one at a time from there to, again, so you can actually introduce yourself and ask your question yourself. So anyone would like to get started, feel free to pop your hand up. Great, I can see we've got Kelly with one. Well, we've got Dawn Green. We might go to Dawn Green first and then Kelly.
Hi, I'm Dawn from Volunteering Tasmania. My question is relating to, and I'm sure there's a lot of not-for-profits here as well who can relate to the fact that we're renting our space, and I'm just wondering what the particular challenges are around you know, the fact that we don't own our office space in North Hobart. So yeah, I'd just be interested to hear what some thoughts are to get around that particular challenge.
I could jump in there if you like. We've got about a couple of hundred sites in Victoria. We don't own all of them. A lot of them are rented. We did all the energy efficiency improvements with those rented properties. Again, it's because we actually didn't have to do much of an outlay for that. We leveraged government programs. With the solar program that we're rolling out, we went to market for a PPA, power purchase agreement, and we've negotiated with the landlords for that. So if we move on, and they've agreed, the vast majority have agreed to stick solar on their buildings, and they're fine with that. They haven't changed the rent. We actually get the benefits from the reduced power, and the PPA keeps paying us. And even when we move on, that PPA still comes to us as part of the arrangement. So I'd encourage you to have a look at some, maybe possibly a PPA type arrangement, where you can still get the benefits for it over the duration, as long as the landlord agrees, and most do, because it actually improves the rentability of the property that they've gone after you've left. So that's how we went, and it's going gangbusters.
Anything, Suzanne or Matthew, to add?
Yeah, well, it's definitely more of a challenge trying to, upgrade lease properties, particularly when you're on short-term leases that are sort of less than 3 years. But LEDs have been good there, and there's been, government energy programs, and I think they still exist as a thing called the REIS scheme that some of the sites have been able to benefit from. With the capital funding that's available here as well, the sites that, they're allowed to apply for money to do things, and some have put in, blinds to keep the hot northern summer sun out. They've put in different air conditioning systems or whatever it might be. And in some cases, yeah, the landlord's pretty friendly and they're willing to pay for something or at least chip in for it. So it's definitely worth engaging with those landlords. But I'd also say, with new sites, if you've got a new amount of funding and you've got to get a new property to perform that program out of, then look for a green lease. Look for a property that's already got the solar panels and the LEDs, and has a good air conditioning system. And yeah, so have a look at things from that point of view as well. And waste is relatively easy. Most lease sites, they might be with the council, and if they're not, use your waste contractor for that. And like somebody said earlier, I think it was Gavin, use one retailer, we'll use one waste contractor as well, if that's possible.
I've got nothing to add there. I'm taking notes on these.
Great, thank you. And next we've got a question from Luke Reed.
Luke.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Gav. My question is kind of a broad one. Obviously, there's some real parallels with all the work a lot of us do around energy efficiency and sustainability, affordability for renters and low-income households. So I'm just wondering, if you were to design, rather than have all the social service organisations doing all this separately and the effort falling on them as a whole, if you were to design a government program to facilitate social service organisations across the sector doing this kind of work, what would be some of the principles that you might have around equity and affordability to support the organisations? Bit of a big question, but could be a workshop on its own.
I can give it a go, Luke, if you like. I'd get ahead of the game, and this is maybe something, look into ACOSS or the state COSS or wherever. I think moving forward, you and you know this, Luke, you're going to need to balance up generation and load. And there'll be opportunities on both sides of the ledger at the moment. Well, in the future, I should say. So we've got way too much generation. We use about a third, a quarter of what solar we've got installed, and the rest is flooding the market. So for us, we're desperately trying to find other ways to consume what we've got. And so that's why we've moved to transport fleet. But if we didn't have those logistics, we'd be looking for other community partners that have load, because that load becomes important moving forward in the future, as you know. So I think consumption's not bad. Consumption's really good, because otherwise it spills. So I think it's a much more joined up place to be in the future, because not everybody needs to have solar or can have solar. And this is where, so places that you can't put it on, like high rises or whatever, got lots of load. marrying and building up. So I think that would be that's the way to go to the future, and that's why we had a rule change, hopefully to facilitate that.
Yeah, your mind is obviously there. I guess what I was referring to is things like, if the Queensland government, for example, they've just released a climate action plan, which is a really bad one. It's they talk about programs that finished in 2017, for example, around renters for solar for renters and so on. So I'm guessing what I'm really referring to is if a government was to have a program called, climate active for social service or community organisations, what would be some of the things around how they fund it and how they facilitate it and training people and the opportunities in post-COVID recovery? So it's quite a bit of a bigger, more strategic question.
Yeah, I can offer something there if you like. Okay, I would probably say that perhaps they could collectively make a toolkit out of it. All the questions we're being asked today, where do you start, how did you do it, what was the low-hanging fruit, what's the governance structure around it, how do you get funding, all those things. I think a toolkit would be a good idea. And creating networking. I mean, here in Adelaide, we've got Carbon Neutral Adelaide, and they don't provide many tools, but they do provide a lot of networking opportunities for a start. And if different organisations are going about engaging consultants as well, why not government engage them through that program and then deliver, offer them up to the organisations to help them. So there's things that they could pay for, and then there's tools and resources that they could provide. There's a government, I think it's a council-based initiative called City Switch, and that's in various different cities, and it is a capital city program, but they offer lots of tools and resources. So that kind of model is quite helpful.
Great, and I think that's a great idea to start developing a toolkit for the sector, putting that thought out there, and maybe something we can go away with. Anyone else with any questions? Looking for any more hands up or in the chat too.
Cash, it's Kelly here from ACOSS. I think the idea of a toolkit's a really good idea, and it's something that ACOSS is keen to develop, and we're certainly conscious. We'll be looking for long-term funding, I should say, to help us support the sector to be able to do this type of work, so develop toolkits. And yeah, I think it would be really good to draw on organisations who would be willing to give pro bono advice to start with. I mean, there are organisations out there that are already doing it here and there, but why not do it as part of their charitable contribution to their organisation? So we're certainly keen to talk to organisations about providing those sorts of services as well.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Any other questions? Anything from anyone else?
I'll just ask a question while I'm here, and apologies if I missed it, because I'm, all three of your organisations are quite large and energy intensive, as you've said, and then there's some of our organisations that are probably small. Just even thinking of ACOSS, I mean, we're fairly small. We don't have the businesses, and for me, I would think that some of what we would need to do would come at a cost, like carbon offsets for airplanes, for example. We do a lot of traveling when we're not in pandemics to do advocacy, for example. So there's costs there, and then switching to a green energy provider, but there might be other places where we might need to offset. So really keen to get a sense what smaller organisations can do to become carbon neutral. And while you're thinking about that, the other part I was also just thinking about is procurement, there are a lot of organisations out there that are themselves carbon neutral. So I imagine one of the things that we can be doing as a small organisation is making sure our suppliers, where we procure from, are themselves carbon neutral. It's probably an easy way we can engage in that.
Just on that one, Kelly, that was one of, with the accreditation we've got, we actually cover for the emissions associated with people that are donating to us. So you can run it both ways. And again, we've got scale, so we can do that. So we've bought offsets to offset the emissions associated with the donations that come into us, and offset the the volunteer stuff and those sorts of things, the things associated with the services we offer, from donation through to recycling to back out again. So I suppose the thing there is to have, as you said, the supply chain, how big and how small it is, and what does it look like. Probably the simplest thing is you go a green energy contract. Doesn't get you to carbon neutral. I think the other thing is the accreditation itself is costly. For us, it's about 10 grand a year to get the climate active certificate, and not to mention all the auditing and all that other stuff that comes with it, and the offsets. So I would say you can achieve reductions. It might not be accredited carbon neutral, but you can achieve it other ways.
Mm.
And I wouldn't want people to think that they have to be climate active accredited to actually go on the journey, because it is a big commitment. But there's all these little journeys that you can go along the way, and added up, they all make a difference. So I don't want to scare people off. It's just simple. Just go on a green plan. Get your energy on a green plan. And that's the start.
I was going to say a similar thing. I mean, Climate Active probably wouldn't thank me for saying it, but you don't have to become carbon neutral certified. I would say get started by doing the low-hanging fruit. Try and get your emissions measured, and there's calculators online. You don't have to measure the lot if you're not becoming certified. And you've got to be a bit careful with greenwashing these days, but as long as you do actually explain what have you covered in your footprint, and what have you bought offsets for, or what have you tried to reduce, as long as you're clear about how you're communicating that, then you can't get in trouble for it. So you can technically be carbon neutral without being certified, but it's more about the effort, just all that emissions reduction. I mean, you can certainly have a target in place, and it could take you years to achieve it, like it did with United Communities. They spent 5 years rather before becoming actually certified carbon neutral in 2015. And we've just come out, last week, Simon Schreipel, the CEO, announced that United Communities would be net zero by 2035. I mean, that's a big target. It's ambitious, but it's where we need to be. But then we've got till 2035 to get there. Do you know what I mean? So it's going to be about trying to reduce, as much as possible, even more than we have. So I think, anybody, any shape or size can do it. My business is carbon neutral, and there's only a couple of us. It's you just do as much as you can. You cycle to work, and you buy an electric car, or you get your solar panels, whatever. There's always something that can be done, and you can communicate that and at least show that you're on the pathway.
Thanks, Suzanne. And if I can take the opportunity to share some of the things that Hester has learnt. And similarly, what we found, one is there's always that 80-20 rule. There's always something you can do, as everyone said, and sometimes big changes with small actions. One thing we found in extending this ambition of net zero to our investment portfolio is when we last year actually made the commitment to be net zero, the methodology didn't even actually exist.
No.
There were a few in development. There's a few in development for an investment portfolio, what a net zero investment portfolio should look like, but we kind of knew we had to do it. But there's a quote that I really like. It comes from my spiritual teachers, and he says, start walking and the path becomes clearer. And I think the planet will appreciate much more the actions we take today, rather than waiting for the perfect methodology or for, the right tick or the auditor's tick. And acting quickly, as I'm sure the IPCC has concluded last week, is probably more important. We've got a comment in the chat from Tam. Tam, I don't know whether you wanted to come off mute and share your thoughts.
Sorry, I took a bit of time just to appear. I saw the messages of a few moms in there saying about, our offspring, and I'm most sympathetic. And I have I suppose, two examples to show to illustrate to you. One is from a young woman, my friend's daughter. I think that she's very strong because she believes strongly in minimizing her own her own energy consumption, and she does it at work as well. Now, in her own home environment, she made her husband no heating, no cooling in in different seasons, and she made her home sharer the same thing. Yeah, and of course she does the same thing. For myself, I have also taken on this position for quite some time now, for about 15 years at least. I haven't used heating nor cooling at all. And I'm now in my 70 plus, I'm still strong. So, so I think I'm okay. I mean, I think that lifestyle is okay. And I just feel that we ourselves have to challenge ourselves in doing it in order for, in order at least for our offspring to see it is all possible. So, and I would like to thank Susan for using the word toolkit, and I think that is a very effective word. So I would say that toolkit, I use that toolkit for myself, and I also need to be more assertive, so that people whom I work with, now it's easier because the climate change group, we are all similar. But in other communities groups that I am a member of as well, I need to be more assertive. So I will actually, openly say what I do, that it is all possible. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why you asked me to speak, but I'm quite shy about this. On the personal matter, I have a very pleasant story to tell you. In 2008, I take on the course of being, and you talk about home energy audit, yeah. So in this workshop, there were only 2 women in the group, and the rest was all tradespeople. And I told them, I told the the group that I try to minimize consumption on everything, including I do not wash my hair with shampoo or even soap, because I don't want it to get down to the drain. I don't want to have to throw the shampoo bottles away, And anyway, the tradesman said, "Oh, so smell, how could you stand, that sort of thing, And I said, "Well, you can't smell anything from me right now, can you?" And then the teacher, she said this. She said, "It's so interesting that we have been conditioning with chemical flavoring as being clean." And I thought, wow. Yeah, so I think I have talked quite a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Anyone else with any questions or thoughts they'd like to ask the panel?
With this,
oh no, it's all right.
with the solar panels, my house hasn't got the solar panels. We have energy lighting and stuff for the house, but I also know when the solar panels are overused by a date, they tend to chuck it in the ground and stuff. Because where I am, we're this town in Australia, and because we get a lot of rain and cloud cover. Sometimes, to me, where this, even though we haven't got a hot water system still, but I'm still a bit unsure about the solar panels yet. I'm just wondering what the even though solar panels been around for a long time, but is there a way to
recycle them?
Not only to recycle, but how the areas like my area, we get a lot of rain. We do get we haven't had wet season pretty much wet season for quite a long time, but it's bound to come back. And I don't think we will get solar panels will be effective in my area.
You're right there, Tanya. One of the things that we've learnt is you have to have a maintenance program. Like if you do emissions reductions, you do end up having appliances, whether they're LED globes or whatever, and they do need to maintain. It's not set and forget. And that way you optimize, maximize what they're doing. And I know with ours, we get, dust storms, you get brake dust, because we're for the ones in the city, they get covered in brake dust. So we've got a regular maintenance program to clean them. And for us, with the PPA, the power purchase agreement we went with, we actually made sure that was in there. So the value. So if anybody's thinking about doing things, there is an ongoing maintenance cost, whether it's your own labor or somebody else's, to just to keep things up and running.
Even if we get cyclones, we're in cyclone alley as well. But I think I've seen somewhere we probably homeowners aren't aware of this, that they have to remove the solar panels because they can come off the roof or something like that. I thought, that's another job that some people don't really want to do, really.
Yeah, and that's where good advice is really important. And so that's where I'd go to, and I'm looking at Kelly here virtually. Climate Council's got accredited people, is that right, Kelly?
Around accessing solar panels?
No, accredited solar providers and all those sorts of things. Is it accreditation?
Yes.
Is it,
the Clean Energy Council and the Smart Energy
that's
Council
the one. Yeah.
do as well. Yeah. So getting advice. So there's different solar panels that perform. Well, there's solar panels that perform differently in different climates. So making sure you've got a solar panel that's good for North Queensland is really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay. All right. Well, we might wind it up here then. I thought that was a really good session. Thank you so much. I certainly got a lot out of it, and I've been working in this space for a really long time. So I learned a lot. So thank you very much to Suzanne, Matthew and Gavin for imparting your experience and wisdom with us. We have recorded this and we'll be making the recording available so that others can learn. I know there were a number of people that couldn't make it today that were hoping that they could still get a recording. And also the presenters are going to create PowerPoint presentations as well that we can share with people that respond to these questions as well, for those people that like something more physical rather than watching a video. I'd really like to thank ACOSS for chairing the session, really appreciate it. And it was great to also hear about what Hester has been doing as well. And it would be good to do some more work together, the community sector and Hester in this space too, and to continue learning from what you're doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this was the last capacity building workshop for this week. For those that have been on the journey or haven't been able to come to the earlier ones, we will be making videos or modules, I should probably call them, available so that you'll get the presentations. And Anastasia and I are here to answer any questions. We're really keen to get feedback around the capacity building workshops and what else ACOSS can be doing to be supporting the community sector to engage more around climate change and social justice. We're still encouraging people to have conversations in your workplace around climate change and social justice, and there is a conversation guide that Anastasia has kindly put together, and I'll just put the link in the chat. And we're also encouraging people to keep the conversation going on social media as well, because this is a really important issue, and the more that we can talk about it, about the impacts of climate change on people experiencing financial and social disadvantage, but also the opportunities to create transformative change for vulnerable people, I think is really important that we start having those conversations. So I just want to again thank you, ACOSS, Gavin, Suzanne and Matthew for being here today and making the presentation. And I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.